everyone, Aimer back with another Mission Impossible episode review. This time I'm reviewing Season 7, Episode 5, which is called TOD-5. I'm experimenting a little bit. I'm using a new program to do my video and audio capture here, so I'm actually interested to see whether this video comes out a little bit better. I'd love to have your feedback about that. Anyway, this episode starts with a fellow named Gordon Holt going into the Woodfield Hotel and finding a man named Morse, who's using the alias Sims, in one of the rooms to make a deal for a container of something called TOD-5. They tensely agree to finalize a deal the next day. Holt makes a call through a fellow named Davies to a Dr. Flory at the Alpha Group, confirming the arrangements that were made. And one of the scientists expresses concerns about Davies. Dr. Flory says in a few days it won't matter. Jim goes to a museum for instructions. The mission? The Alpha Group is looking for the TOD-5 to complete a biological weapon for use against the U.S. government, and the IMF must put them out of business. We have an apartment scene where we see the usual gadgetry and planning. Jim and Willie catch Morse in a garage in Woodfield and take the canister of TOD-5. Morse reminds him that the Alpha Group already has lots of other weapons. Jim already knows that. Holt arrives back at the hotel, and the desk clerk tells him that there isn't, and hasn't, been a Sims checked into the place. Holt is annoyed and confused by this and asks for a room, getting number 12, which was next to Sims's room. He picks a lock on room 13, which he finds empty. Holt tries to call Alpha Group, but is told by the operator that long-distance lines are down, and also finds that his car won't start. He accuses mechanic Willie of messing with his car. Sheriff Jim arrives and tells Holt to back off with the unfounded accusations. Screams are heard outside, and Jim finds a young man with strange marks all over his face. Waitress Mimi looks on in tears as Dr. Barney takes the man away, and Holt notices that Barney is wearing an army uniform. Later, Mimi tells Holt that the guy who collapsed was a boyfriend, sort of. He asks her to get to a phone or a car, but she's hesitant, and he gets upset about her unwillingness to help him. We see Davies watching Holt go by, and he heads to the tavern, pressing Mimi for information about Holt. Mimi gives Jim his beer glass so he can check it for prints. Holt heads back to the garage, finding Sims's car with an IMF-planted canister of TOD-5 in the back seat, and finds the keys in the ignition. So he starts to take the car and head out of town. But he finds Sheriff Jim at a highway roadblock, and apparently all the roads out of town are under construction. Nowhere to go. Heading back to the bar, he apologizes to Mimi for getting upset before, and asks her to be straight with him about all of the strange happenings. Frightened Mimi, calling herself Charlene, admits that soldiers came and took Sims away in a steel coffin and disinfected his room. Holt fills in the blanks. All of the officials, including Sheriff Jim, are operating under their orders. He tells Mimi to come find him the next time she sees someone get sick. She agrees. Davies reports what he's seen to Flory, including the weird sickness, but Flory says not to worry. If it was really TOD-5, the whole population would have died by now. Flory tells Davies to corral Holt in the canister and get it to him pronto. That's his job. Jim is able to identify Davies from his prints, and Mimi goes to Holt's room. She knocks him out with a needle to the neck. The IMF come in to gaslight the room, injecting Holt so that he will develop the spots as well. Holt wakes up a few minutes later, but his watch has been set back to compensate, so he figures he just dozed off for a moment. Mimi tells him that mechanic Willie has fallen ill, and Holt sees the army truck coming to take him away. Holt follows them to their facility, where he finds several corpses, including Willie. He's found by the soldiers and is questioned by Barney, who admits that yes, there is indeed a dangerous plague out there, and work is being done on an antidote, but the whole thing is being kept a secret to avoid a nationwide panic. Barney shows Holt that they both have lesions, and that he'll have to stay, because he's infected like everybody else. Barney allows Holt to hit him and escape. Holt goes back to find Mimi, who tells him that she's never been sick, and Holt figures she might be one of the rare people that Barney mentioned who is immune. Sheriff Jim comes to the door searching for Holt, but collapses when he comes into the room. Mimi suggests taking Jim's car to get out of town. Holt figures it's his best shot, with Davies not far behind. The car is let through the roadblock, but of course Davies isn't, and Mimi activates her watch, which serves as a beacon to the IMF to track them. Somehow or other, Davies manages to get to a point where he shoots out Holt's tires and starts shooting at them, demanding the container. Holt is surprised that he seems to have turned on the Alpha Group and offers the money he has, but Davies isn't interested. The IMF catch up to them, but Jim says they can't interfere or it will blow the mission. Faced with no choice in the standoff, Holt tosses his gun away and gives up the container to Davies, who takes a look at it. While he's distracted, Holt deftly rolls and gets his gun back, shooting Davies. Mimi is shot in the shoulder in the fracas, that's a pretty common thing recently, and the watch breaks. But she's able to inform Jim that she's okay and the watch is broken. Holt takes her to Davies' car, taking the bag of money but leaving behind the canister for some reason, and heads away. Jim realizes their only chance is to get Davies to talk, so he's handcuffed to the car and left with the canister nearby, which Barney threatens to blow open once the IMF is out of range. So finally, Davies agrees to tell them. Holt ends up going to a church building, where he takes Mimi inside to the Alpha Group lab. Flory asks for the canister, and Holt tells him he's the canister now, he's infected. And now Flory has no choice but to find an antidote using Mimi's immunity. After a minute or so, Holt seems to die, and the transmitter in Mimi's watch is found as the IMF pull up to the building. Suddenly, Holt gets up and realizes that the lesions are wearing off. The IMF bursts in, with Jim shooting Flory and rescuing Mimi, who recovers at a hospital. Mission accomplished. I'm going to give this episode a grade of a D+. At first I had it somewhat higher. I was going to say C-, but then I kind of, when I talked it through with the recap and made some other notes for myself here, I said, nah, you know what, it's D+ on that border of C-. I think that's where I would like to put it. Starting with the good. The teamwork in this episode is quite good. Good role for Mimi Davis here. Barbara Anderson is Mimi Davis. The other IMF members, do enough here that, it's a good power of 4 mission, if you want to call it that. From the standpoint of a story that the writers were going to tell, I would say that it's a decent story. It's only cookie cutter in the sense that it is one of those plots where, we have to take away all of the options from the antagonist or the mark. And so, he's got nowhere to run, basically, and he has to lead us to wherever we want to go, or he has to give up the information that we're looking for in order to save his life or whatever. We've seen that idea many, many times before. Sometimes it works out tremendously well and is very, very entertaining and is a great episode. Operation Rogosh, for example, would be a fine example of that. Sometimes not so much. Here it's okay. I think something else that's also good, there's not a lot of wasted time in this one. The team stays focused on the mission, and the action is driven by Holt as the mark, as the antagonist, in a believable way. I commented in my first blurb about this episode that the IMF makes Holt work through their process for himself instead of just kind of spoon-feeding him things, which I said was a little bit refreshing. However, this one does, watching it back again, this one feels like a slow mover. Even though there's not a lot of wasted time, I guess you could say, and I have said it, it does feel a little slow. And I thought about it and I said, why is that? Why do I feel that way about it? Certainly, there's no question. This isn't as good as Operation Rogosh. We have this sort of, take away all of the options plot. Where I think it has a problem, it's similar to a couple of episodes back in season 5. The ones that I'm thinking of are My Friend, My Enemy, if you remember that one, and there's one that was called The Hostage. And I commented in both of those episodes that a problem with those, why they didn't feel like they were really great episodes, even though the story was decent, was that the IMF was reacting rather than acting in terms of what was going on. They weren't the ones who were driving the action. And in a way that can be good. But it doesn't come across so great unless the IMF are pushing things a little bit more than I feel that they did in those episodes and this one as well. If you think back to the very beginning to Operation Rogosh, yes, the IMF is put Rogosh in a position where he had to figure some things out for himself, but they pushed him a little bit all the way. They gave him a little thing. He met with the prosecuting attorney. Then he met with his lawyer. Then he met with his secretary, and little pieces of the puzzle kind of came from all of those interactions. That does happen here, as Holt figures things out, but it doesn't quite have the same effect here. And maybe it's just that Rogosh was that good that often imitated, never duplicated sort of thing. But it doesn't come across as well as it did in episodes like that. That's for certain. A couple of other good things. First of all, I liked the scene where Holt and Davies are having their confrontation, where Jim kind of holds the IMF back, saying, you know what, look, we can't interfere, the mission comes first. There's an implication there that, Jim and the others may like to step in to protect Mimi or whatever. No, we got to let this play out sort of thing. I like that. That was kind of neat. Also good. I think that Gordon Holt as an antagonist in this episode is pretty decent, insofar as he certainly avoids the kisses of death. I would say that this is an episode, and there have been a few of those lately, where the usual calculus I use for gauging villains or antagonists on the show doesn't really apply so well here. Normally I say, well, is the antagonist lame? Are they a schmuck? Are they unengaging? Holt is not any of those three. And I don't think it's really fair for whatever reason. I just feel that it's not fair to judge him according to that calculus. He's just a guy who's out there trying to do something that the IMF's job is to prevent. And they just have to manipulate him by taking away his options and leading them to where they want to be. I think he was fine there, but as I've commented in previous episodes, sometimes it's good to have a bad guy, right? And Holt is another one of those antagonists that doesn't really strike you as being a bad guy. If anything, Dr. Flory is a bit of a bad guy. And kind of moving over to discussions of things that are not so great. The guest stars here, Peter Haskell as Holt is fine. Ray Walston is great. He is a fantastic actor, but he's completely wasted here. I mean, I think that this episode does suffer a little bit from the idea of having multiple antagonists. Most of the focus is on Holt, but it's really, Victor Flory and the Alpha group that the IMF is after. And I've commented in other episodes that that's always sometimes it's always tough to pull off. And it doesn't go so well here. So I didn't like that so much. Other things that were not good. Holt is a really, really smart guy, but so the IMF plan seems to hinge on being able to predict exactly what he's going to do. Like, for example, I mean, they're setting him up with things from which he's going to draw obvious conclusions. The phone lines don't work, the long distance lines don't work. There are these roadblocks where Jim is completely obvious about the fact that, hey, buddy, you're not going anywhere, and we are basically putting this together to keep everybody in town. And so, based on that, Holt goes back to town and he goes to the hotel bar. Like there's nowhere else in town that he's supposed to go, or he could go, and he'll run to Mimi as opposed to anyone else when he gets stymied at the roadblock. I mean, what if he went to a different bar or something? Woodfield, by the looks of it, especially from that scene where, the young man, runs out into the street and he's got all of these lesions and marks on his face. It doesn't seem like Woodfield is like a really, really tiny town. There's got to be several hundred people there, I would think. Maybe 1,000 people, especially if there is at the Woodfield Hotel 19 rooms, at least, because Mimi says she's in room 19. It's not that small a town. Of all of the places that Holt goes to, the only one that, he just happens to go to the hotel bar where he finds Mimi at that point, I don't know. Some of the contrivances and the things that the IMF set up do make some sense. So that Holt draws the obvious conclusions about what's going on. But then, the ability of the IMF to predict his behavior and everything else that's going to happen after that seems a little bit far-fetched. Also, there's a bit of a problem here in terms of the thing that I've commented about many times, about unlimited resources. The IMF, under these circumstances, within 24 hours, is able to get a whole military building ready with a morgue set up and all of that, just like that. That seems a little bit on the, oh my gosh, how did they pull that off kind of side. They did something similar in 2000, a few episodes ago, where they just happened to have a building that was, a perfect backdrop for what they needed to do to simulate the whole end of the world thing. Whatever. Sometimes you have to suspend your disbelief, so I guess I can let that go under certain circumstances. I must point out, however, the plot holes that happen towards the end of the episode. The climax obviously kind of begins once, Jim falls to the floor, ostensibly dead from, the plague that's going around. And Holt and Mimi decide, okay, now it's time to get out of town and take the sheriff's car. At that point, Davies follows them. Holt is able to get through the roadblock because he's driving an official car. Davies obviously is not. But somehow or other, Davies is able to catch up with him, not only catch up with him, but get ahead of Holt so he could shoot out the tires of the car and force the confrontation that happens. How exactly did he do that? Obviously, he went off-road, he found some way, but that just doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense to me. Holt obviously knows the area just as well as Davies does. So, that was way too coincidental. Also, the fact that Davies is even involved, and the IMF realizes who he is and that he could be a problem. The IMF needed some other contingencies, I think, once they discovered that he was hanging around. I think they play that way too cavalierly, in my opinion. They have to be able to keep tabs on this guy. They really do, and they don't even seem to bother. That just doesn't make a lot of sense to me at all. I mean, they don't have a way necessarily of knowing what Davies is going to do, even if they assume that he's an Alpha Group operative. No matter what, whether they don't suspect him or whether they have to keep tabs on this guy. Either he's going to help Holt, in which case they should keep an eye on him, or he's going to be a wild card, which is even more reason to keep an eye on him. There's no reason not to keep more of an eye and tabs on this guy. That was not very, very smart on behalf of the IMF. Also, there's major contrivances when it comes to the rest of the ending. Somehow or other, the IMF is able to give Holt an injection that creates these lesion sores on his body that rub off eventually. I'm not aware of any way you can do that using an injection, unless you're going to give, I mean, again, I don't know this, unless it's kind of something, poison ivy-ish or whatever that causes, your skin to get irritated or something like that. That I don't think is possible, and that's a major, major contrivance. More to the point, though, when Holt actually does get back to Alpha Group, he appears to die at the exact moment that the plot demanded, so that, Victor Flory is about to do an autopsy on the guy to figure out why he died. Right at that moment, how is that possible? The only way that's possible is if the IMF somehow gave him a drug that they say, okay, he's going to, have, what appears to be, death in 1 hour. How do they know it's going to take him 1 hour to get to Alpha Group? Alpha Group could be anywhere. They don't know where it is. That's the whole point of the episode. So that was a complete plot contrivance and a big plot hole, frankly. Then, to top it off, when Holt gets up and realizes, hey, I'm not dead, and he starts to, play around with the lesions on his face, he realizes that it's all just sort of like makeup. Again, that makes no sense. Either they're real lesions or they're not. And if they're not real lesions, how does an injection cause you to get stuff that looks like sores on your face that are actually makeup that will rub off? It just does not make sense at all. Another thing that actually I should have pointed out before, the confrontation between Holt and Davies. Once Holt is able to get away and go to Davies' car so he can rush away and get to Alpha Group, he grabs the bag of money and Mimi and goes to the car. And he leaves the canister of TOD-5 behind. Now, we know it's not a canister of TOD-5, but Holt doesn't know that and Davies doesn't know that. Why did he leave the canister behind? Other than the writers had no other idea of how they could finish off the episode other than to have that scene with the IMF threatening to leave Davies with an open can of TOD-5 right next to him. It doesn't make sense from Holt's standpoint that he would just leave the canister behind. It really, really, really does not. Even if he didn't intend to turn it over to Flory, this just occurred to me that maybe he was like, you know what, Dr. Flory, I'm not giving you your canister, because he does say to Flory when Flory says, hey, where's the canister? It's like, I'm the canister. I suppose maybe that's what he's thinking, but it's very, very short-sighted thinking. What if they actually needed some more of the TOD-5 in order to do experiments, in order to find a cure or whatever? It just doesn't make sense that under those circumstances that Holt would be able to think that far ahead to say, I'm going to leave it behind because, I have some other, he's playing some sort of three-dimensional chess or something like that, where he thinks that he can use the canister in some other way. Really didn't make sense. To kind of put a little bit of a bow on this, also weirdness there. At the end, when the IMF burst in, Dr. Flory pulls out a gun and it looks like he's going to shoot Jim. Jim shoots back, and Flory is apparently dead, although we don't see him. So I don't know if Ray Walston just didn't want to get shot and didn't want to film himself getting shot. That was very, very, very strange. I do not understand what happened there. That did not make sense. Last note, and then I'm going to wrap this one up. From the very beginning, I had an inkling, and I said, Woodfield Hotel. Where have I heard that before? And darn it, if that's not the same name of the town in the season 2 episode, The Town. Yeah, that little place was called Woodfield as well, which was filled with communist agents. I'm sure everybody recalls that episode. If you don't, please check out my review of it. Communist agents who basically, Jim stumbles upon. They have, a nefarious plan that the IMF must foil. And when I realized that, I just had a sense, and I went back, isn't that the name of the town? And then I looked, and I'm like, oh yeah, it is. And I'm like, oh boy, that doesn't bode well. But I just find it really interesting and ironic, funny even, that in that episode, the town called Woodfield, that was a place where those townspeople were trying to manipulate and fool the IMF. And this time, the IMF is using the town of Woodfield to manipulate Holt. And it's just kind of interesting how everything kind of comes full circle. Again, back in 1972, nobody would have noticed that oh my gosh, they're using the same name as an episode that aired in 1967 or 1968. But obviously, today with all the information we have, it's relatively simple to see. And I just found that amazing, the contrast and the juxtaposition of how that town of Woodfield compares to this town of Woodfield. Just thought I'd throw that out there. Anyway, I think I'll wrap this one up with that. Thank you guys, as always, for watching. It's always much appreciated. Please like this episode video review. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And please leave your comments. I would definitely please appreciate some feedback about whether or not this video looks and sounds clearer. I have a feeling that the new program that I'm using is actually able to capture me more in high definition. So hopefully the video does come out better. I know that YouTube tries to do some rendering in high def, but I would like your feedback about that. Just whether or not you notice any difference in the videos, please let me know. Thank you all again, and I will see you next time.